there's some because what we have does begin with Seif Tes, but that is what the project prepared for today. We're learning in this course of Rav Yosef Shlomo ben Risha. He should have a refuah shalema miyad. We're delighted to wish ZC Raskin Mazel Tov on the birth on the naming of her grandson, Shmuel Isaac Raskin, named after his great grandfather, who was a Tavrusa of Maizedi, and the male was the son of Fega Rachel Gollum. So it's all in the family. And Mazel Tov to Devorah Leah Minkowitz on the birth of her daughter Musya. We wish everybody shenachas, and we'll get right into our class. So it does begin with Seif Tes, which is a little confusing, but it is the beginning of the limud that we're doing today. Ala pasuk katanti mikol hachasadim. So this is a pasuk in this week's parsha when Yaakov Avinu understands that he's going to confront Esav imminently. He does three things, as we famously know. He prepares for war, he sends presents to Esav, he engages in diplomatic overtures, and he davens to Hashem. And among what he says to Hashem is, Katanti mikol hachasadim. I am diminished, I am small, I am undeserving of all of your kindness. Mefarish Rashi says on the words katanti mikol chasadim, nismatu zchuyosai al yidei hachasadim va'emesh shasisa imi. Yaakov Avinu says that my zechuyos are diminished in the face of all of the kindness and all of the truth that you did with me. Lekach ani yarei, and therefore I am fearful. Shema mi shehivtachtani nislachti bechet v'yigram li lihimaser biyad Esav. Perhaps from when you promised me that everything was going to be okay and that I was going to come back b'shalom and everything, maybe from that time until now I was soiled with sin that would cause that I should be given over in the hands of Esav. Basically, that Esav will do something to me. So that's the words of Rashi. Now, Bigeres HaKodesh in the Tanya, Dibra Maschil Katanti, Shekasav Achar Bi'asai Mi Peterburg. So the Alter Rebbe wrote this letter after he came back, after he was freed, and the beginning of the letter begins with the word katanti. I am small, I am diminished. Mivar ad meharzokin es pasuk. There, the Alter Rebbe explains this same pasuk, and he says, "Kol chesed shekadosh baruch hu oiseh la'adam." Every kindness, every goodness that Hashem does for a person, sarich lifol eitzel la'adam sheyehei shefal ruach, should cause a person to be humble. Because when Hashem does a chesed with us, this is Hashem drawing us closer. And the greater the chesed, the greater is the closeness with Hashem, and therefore becomes hu yoser keloi. And then the smaller and the more non-existent the person feels. So the closer the spark comes to the flame, the more it becomes subsumed in the flame. So the Alter Rebbe explains that every chesed is Hashem drawing us closer in a manifest way, and the closer we are, the more we become batal, where we become non-existent. V'zeu katanti mikol chasadim. And this is what it means, katanti mikol chasadim. That I become diminished from all the kindnesses. Shemikol chasadim shekadosh baruch hu asam Yaakov, nase Yaakov katan be'enov. From all of the kindnesses that Hashem did with Yaakov, Yaakov became small and smaller in his eyes. Shezeu habitul haba mitzad hakiros. And this is the self-abnegation that results from coming closer to Hashem. Now, the Rebbe says, Hatam Madua Rashi Mevi Pirish Acher Mi Pirish Admar Zaken. And why does Rashi say something different from what the Alter Rebbe said in Tanya? So he explains. Rashi Mefarish Pshush Shel Mikra. She's explaining Pshat. Ubepashtos Hapasuk Eina Muvan. And on the level of Pshat, the question that we see clarity on is Hayitachin sheYaakov bikesh meKadosh Baruch Hu hatzileni na goimer la'achrei shekfar lifnei ze kibel haftacha meKadosh Baruch Hu ushmarticha v'goimer ve'yeimach. Why would Yaakov turn to Hashem and ask him, please save me from the wrath of my brother, after Hashem had already promised him, I'm going to watch over you, I'm going to be with you. So that's the question on the level of Pshat. Perish Admar Zaken al Katanti Mikol Chasadim. And on the other hand, the Alter Rebbe's explanation of Katanti is Shahachasadim Pa'alu Bitul B'Yakov. The Alter Rebbe is explaining that the Chasadim that the Eibishter showered upon Yaakov caused him this complete sense of self-effacement and abnegation, complete sense of bittul. And the Alter Rebbe loy ba l'taretz ve'ena misakev ala she'ela. Alter Rebbe is not coming to explain. The Alter Rebbe is not hung up on a question. Madua Yaakov hutzrach levakish hatzileni. Why Yaakov had to say, save me. That's not where the Alter Rebbe is coming from. Sharia bitul einay siba shahavtacha loy tekoyim. Because the bittul on the part of somebody is not a reason for why the promise that Hashem gave shouldn't be mekuyim. So he's not looking to reconcile the question that Rashi is asking. And because Rashi is asking that question, because from the perspective of Pshat, there is a question. Hashem promised you that everything's going to be okay. Hashem promised you that he's going to be with you, that he has your back. And now you're saying, Hatzilenina, save me? So Rashi's answering, Shema Misha Hiftachtani Nislachlachti. Yaakov worries that maybe from the time that Hashem promised him that everything's going to be okay, he became soiled, he became flawed, he became marred by something he did, and therefore undeserving of the promise that Hashem had given him. See if Yud. Ach tzorich lahavin. But we have to understand. Ech shayach sheYaakov yisyare shema nislachlachti b'chet. Okay, so we understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying, that the closer you come to the Eibishter, the smaller you feel, the more you're in a state of bittul. But that's not the question of Rashi. Rashi's question is, how could Yaakov worry when Hashem promised him? But the Rebbe is asking a question on Rashi's answer, which is, Ech shayach inin kazeh etzel Yaakov. How is it plausible? How is it possible to think that Yaakov should be afraid that he did a chet? How is it possible that he did a chet? Hein emes shakasher nasa nes liyehudi azai minachin loy mischu Yosef. It's true that when a Jew experiences a nes, so some of his zechuyos are deducted. Okay, so a person accrues a certain amount of zechuyos, and because of the nes, there's a certain amount that's deducted. Avol ein ze ella shemenachin loy mischu Yosef. Avol loy shenasa kan inishal chet chas v'shalom. Okay, so that would be that there's a certain amount of zechuyos that have been deducted, that have been detracted. But what does this have to do with a sin? How can we attribute sinning to Yaakov? And the same thing we don't understand about this letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote after he came back from Peterburg. By using these words from our parsha, from this week's parsha, it seems that the Alter Rebbe haisagam kavanase l'ramiz, it seems that the Alter Rebbe is hinting shemibli habeit al kach she'oid b'yoseh b'tfisa hisu lo yaftachas habal shem tov u'mageh sheyishtachrer, that although he had a promise from the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid that came to visit him when he was in prison, that he would be freed from prison, and that he will, after his redemption from freedom, be able to continue to reveal Chasidus. And he was promised he would be able to reveal and teach Chasidus with greater strength than before. Afal Pikain, still in all, Mivakesh Mekadosh Baruch Hu Gam Ata al Zeh, Kevon Shekitanti Mikol Chasodim Keperish Rashi. Still in all, the Alter Rebbe is asking for Hashem's chasadim, for Hashem to watch over him. And he's saying, I have become small, I have become diminished from everything that you did. And so it seems that he is operating in line with what Rashi is saying, that somehow something has been detracted, something has been deducted, something has been diminished, and he needs to daven to Hashem for chasadim. Ki hagam shebegeres hakodesh mevar ad mazokin es haperish b'katanti v'goyim ba'ifan achem haperish Rashi, because although, yes, the Alter Rebbe gives a different understanding of the words katanti from what Rashi, but still, the Rebbe says, afal pikein, still in all, Aleph, number one, Lifi Pashtus Hadvarim. Simply speaking, Mizeh Atzmai Shematchilas Heigeres Beloshen HaPasuk Katanti, from the very fact that Alter Rebbe begins his letter with this word, Mashmatz, understood? She'ad Marzuki Miskavim Bigerezu, Lahadgish Gam Es Ha'inyan Dikatanti Lifi Pashtus HaPasuk. That he wants to also include in what he is writing here the simple pshat of the pasuk katanti, shezeu keperish Rashi, ubefrat she'admar hazokin omer al perish Rashi shezeu yena shel Torah. And especially because the Alter Rebbe said, the sicha, from what I understand, Chani, the sicha is in Chelek Chaf. Vayishlach Yotes Kislev. So let me go back. So even though, to go back to the beginning of this paragraph, even though the Alter Rebbe gives a different explanation, a novel explanation on the words katanti, but still, from the fact that he includes the words katanti, it's understood that the Alter Rebbe also is including and wants to underscore.
Rivky, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Did not realize that. Okay. I don't know when I got muted, so the third time's a charm. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the paragraph. Ki hagam shebegeres hakodesh mevar ad mazokin es haperish b'katanti v'goymer ba'ofen achem haperish Rashi, because although in the Igeres HaKodesh and the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains the word katanti, explains this concept in a different way. Afal became, but still in all, Aleph. First of all, Lifi Pashtus Hadvarim. Simply speaking, Mizeh Atzmai Shematchilas Heigeres Beloshen HaPasuk Katanti Goymer. From the very fact that the Alter Rebbe uses this particular terminology from this pasuk, mashmatz, understood, she'admar hazoki miskavim bigerezu lahadgish gam es ha'inyan dikatanti, that the Alter Rebbe intended in his letter to also underscore lefi pashtus hapasuk, according to the simple explanation what katanti means, shezehu keperish Rashi, which is as Rashi teaches. Ubifrat, the Rebbe says, and especially she'admar hazokin omer perish Rashi shezehu yena shel Torah, that the Alter Rebbe taught us that the words of Rashi, that the perish of Rashi is like the wine that comes out of the grape. It's the most precious part of the grape. It's the most precious way of understanding Torah. So by using that term, not only is it not possible to say that he's discounting what Rashi is saying, but the Rebbe is teaching that the Alter Rebbe wants to underscore what Rashi is saying, even as he offers a different interpretation of the word katanti. And Beis Yisera Mizeh, and even more so, Bigeres HaKodesh Gufa, in that very letter, in that very section of Tanya, Merames Admar Hazak in the Parish Rashi El Pasuk, the Alter Rebbe alludes to Rashi's explanation, Ubehachrach Leimer, Shakavanase Kan Gam Lekatonti Mikola Chasadim Parish Rashi, Ubemele Gam Lesiyama Inin Hatzilenina. So we're forced to say that the Alter Rebbe wanted to include the parish of Rashi on these words. And if he wants to include the parish of Rashi, that's inclusive of the last words of Rashi, which are the words of Yaakov, Hatzilenina, please save me. The Imkain in a
Rivky,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense, or at least not to me. If the Alter Rebbe had a different explanation for the words katanti, then why are we assuming that in this case he's going back to the simple explanation of Rashi? We know the Alter Rebbe had a different explanation.
Because the Rebbe is explaining that the Alter Rebbe did not have to start this Igeres with the word katanti. There are many, many ways to write a letter. Why did the Alter Rebbe start the letter, use these words as his point of departure? Further, the Rebbe says that in the Igeres, the Alter Rebbe alludes to what Rashi teaches, which means that in addition to his novel explanation, he is also underscoring what Rashi teaches with Pashtos.
Okay.
Inclusive of the fact that Yaakov said to Hashem now, Hatzilenina, help me, please.
Okay.
So now the Rebbe says, V'im Kain, and if so, ain't a movement, it's not understood. Ketzat shayach etzel Rabbeinu Hazaken inishal ketanti. Shema yigram achet v'chulei. How is it possible? So we have the same question that we had for Yaakov. Now the Rebbe is saying about the Alter Rebbe. How can you attribute the inyan of chet to the Alter Rebbe? Again, because we're assuming that we're not talking about people that are trafficking in false modesty, right? So the Alter Rebbe who wrote the Tanya, and not going to use words lightly. So why is Alter Rebbe saying Hatzilenina? What is he afraid of? What happened here? Yud Aleph. Bechlalos ha'asbara bazahi. The Rebbe says generally the explanation is as follows: Shekasher oilim ledarga nalis yoser. As a person alights to a higher level of spirituality, azai masha mikoidim lehayachet. So what happens is that even if something was not prior considered a sin, but now in this more exalted stature, as they go up a rung in the ladder, now now it's considered a chet, it's considered a sin. Vapshat bazehu. And what does this mean? Shaloi rakim yasa ata maisa ze mechodesh harei zachet harei ein zachedesh. This means not only that if he would do that same action now, it would be considered a sin. That's not novel. If it's wrong, it's a sin. Ela ha'maisa ha'koidem shebishas maisa lo yaya nechshav l'chet. But the chiddush in this understanding is that what he did, let's say a year ago, or a month ago, or a week ago, that when that action was done was not considered a chet. Hine ata donim oisayel. But now he is judged, and that is considered a chet. V'tzarich lashuv al zeh b'tshuva, and he has to do tshuva. He has to return in tshuva. Okay, but the Rebbe says,
I don't understand. Sorry, but why is he being judged stringently in a retroactive way if the only reason he's judged more stringently is because of where he got to now?
That's what the Rebbe is saying. That's a chiddush. That's how it works. There's another sikha where the Rebbe says a meichedik word on the word on avodah zara. What's avodah zara? Avodah that is zara, that is strange for you today. Maybe for somebody else it's not avodah zara. Maybe for you yesterday it wasn't avodah zara, but today it doesn't behoove you. Today it's a service that is strange.
Right, but we're still saying that you're being judged, this person is being judged on something that they did when it wasn't zar to them.
Correct. Yeah, that's the chiddush here. The Rebbe is saying the fact that if they did it again, that they would be judged more stringently, that's not a chiddush. The chiddush is that what they did earlier, now shows up as a chet. But the Rebbe says, "Aval adayin ein ze maspik," but this is still not enough. Ki hein emesh shebeshas ma'aseh lo haya ze chet. Chani, I think that this will help explain your question, what's bothering you. It's true that when the person did it, it wasn't considered a chet. Va'aval became bal yaseh chet yichashev, and then, nevertheless, when the person alights to a higher level, it's considered a chet. But the Rebbe says, but harei behechrach loymar shegam b'shas ma'aseh haya zeh sheloi betachlis kidibai nitkin glatazach. But retroactively, we have to say that if it's now considered a chet because the person's on a higher level, then even when they were in a lower level, it wasn't 100% galactic. It wasn't 100% smooth. It wasn't 100% kosher. It wasn't 100% right. Because otherwise, why would it be a chet now? Because if everything was in order the way it should be, then you can't do tshuva later. So how can we say that there was something that Yaakov, the Bechira Avos, did that wasn't 100% kosher? How can we say that the Alter Rebbe then later applies it to himself? And this is recorded. I mean, this thing is recorded. Rashi records it. It's recorded in the Tanya. How can we even postulate such a thing? And the Rebbe says we'll understand it based on an explanation. I don't know. Chani's asking if it's freezing for everyone. First, I was trying to figure out, are we all in the same room? And I thought she was talking about the temperature. Then I realized, no, people are saying
It's freezing for.
it's not freezing. Sorry. I hope it works out. Chani. We are in one room. That's the pshat. Vice days. Okay. So the Rebbe says that the panim yafos mehasfarim shehuvu b'sifrei chasidus. It's from among the sfarim that are brought that are cited in Sifrei Chasidus bekama mekaymus mehanit fasim, from the Chasidus that was already published. V'oid yoser, and it's even more cited b'mamori haChasidus shalaeis ata adayin lo nitfasu, and in Mamori Chasidus that were until now not yet published. Now, Mechaber Haponim Yafos Haya Talmud HaMagid. The author of this book was a student of the Magid. Asher Yutes Kislev Hu Yom HaYilula Shel HaMagid. Yutes Kislev is the Yom HaYilula of the Magid. V'gam Geulas Admar Zakim Yutes Kislev Kshur Bekach She Yutes Kislev Hu Yom HaYilula Shel HaMagid. And the fact that the Alter Rebbe experienced redemption on Yutes Kislev, this is connected to the fact that it was the Yom HaYilula of the Magid. And the Panim Yafos B'Perish Ha'ini Dekatanti Mikala Chasadim explains the following on the words, I have been diminished, I have become small from all of your kindnesses. And he explains as follows. Ba'aliyas haneshamas ma'olam echad la'olam nala yoser. When the neshamas of tzaddikim alight from one level to a higher level. Sharei tzaddikim ein lahem menucha. Shenemar yechu michayil el chayil. Because tzaddikim never rest, even when they're no longer in this world, as it says in Tehillim, yechu michayil el chayil. They go from strength to strength. Hine b'terem she'olim la'olam hanala. So he explains that before they alight to a higher world, hareim chayzrim lekatnos, they return to a diminished state. Now, what does that mean? And as it's written, as it's explained also in the Tanya, regarding the idea of a tzaddik falling 7 times and rising, and in the lashon, in the terminology of this sefer, he explains, being godless rishon, the godless sheni, yesh katnus sheni. Between every level of godless, there is a level of katnus. So maybe you could say that before every expansion, there's a contraction. Okay, before every dilation, there's a diminishment. V'zehu perish hapasuk hatanti mikol chasad b'goymer. Ba'aliyah is Yaakov she'ola michutz la'aretz Eretz Yisrael. Hinei koidem ha'aliyah haya etzlei katanti. So when it came to Yaakov Avinu, when he left chutz la'aretz and he was going to Eretz Yisrael, so he was going on a higher level. It was an aliyah, and before that aliyah, there was a contraction, there was a katanti, there was a diminishment that led to the expansion that was to come.
Rivky, a diminishment in him or a diminishment in the world, like a cosmic diminishment?
A diminishment in him, a diminishment in his level or in his galus that he was able to receive.
Okay.
So I think maybe other people can please chime in, but maybe it's like this idea of ayin, that there has to be an ayin before you come into, the Ezri. It's from the ayin that Yavai Ezri. There's always this contraction from which the expansion blooms, as it were. And based on this, we can understand Yaakov Avinu's request and his beseeching, save me, please, from the hands of my brother Esav. Because even after the promise from Hashem that Hashem was going to take care of him, was going to be good, and after the previous alighting to higher and higher levels, but now that Yaakov Avinu is poised to go on a higher level, he was experiencing this katanti, and at this moment when he experienced the katanti, zokoku lahatzilenina, he is needy for this idea of extra help from Hashem. Al pizeh yuvan. I'm sorry. Ukadiisa bepanim yafasham, and like it's written in that sefer, she'af al pisha katnu sheni hu l'mayla migadlus rishon. Even though this second contraction is a higher level than the previous expansion, as it were, af al pikein, but still in all, kevan shezehu bechol zois initial katnus, but still, because you're in this modality of diminishment, nidreshes oz shmir gedayla. There's a vulnerability in this diminishment, and you need extra assistance, and you need extra shmir, you need extra observation from Hashem. Yud Beis. And now the Rebbe brings this to the Alter Rebbe. Al derech zeh yuvon gam b'negei la'admar hazaken. So in line with this understanding of what Yaakov Avinu was davening for, we will understand it vis-a-vis the Alter Rebbe. Yadua, it's known, that the whole idea of the wellsprings of Chasidus spreading to the outlying areas, to the chutzah, was begun by the Alter Rebbe be'ikar, in the main, la'acharei bi'asai mePeterburg. In the main, it happened after the Meiser, after the imprisonment, and after the redemption. V'im kein, harei ze meira al goydel ha'aliyah. So then once we understand the chronology, we understand that there was a tremendous aliyah for the Alter Rebbe after Peterburg. She'aleh higia admar zaken la'achrei Peterburg, b'hashva legadol shelifnei Peterburg. When you compare before and after, you understand that the Alter Rebbe lighted to a whole new level of greatness after Peterburg. Ubein hagadol shel admar zaken shekoydem Peterburg ad legadol sheloi shelamayla me hakoydem shelachrei Peterburg. So it was greatness in terms of what he accomplished, and greatness in terms of the Torah that he taught, etc., etc. And therefore, he ne bizman shebein tayim. And so in between these two stages, haya etzla inidikatanti, hamaisa shel adma hazaken. So the imprisonment is this contraction, is this constraint, is this going into this katanti. And the Rebbe now, flushes it out. He says, "Shaharei hamaiser haya malava biyisurim rabim ugdoilim." The imprisonment came with tremendous pain and all kinds of pain. Yisurim rabim ugdoilim, varied and terrible types of pain. Ukiyadua, and as is known, Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev Tava me'adma hazaken. Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev, he Tava means he demanded from the Alter Rebbe b'negei l'ma'asarei, vis-a-vis his imprisonment. He said to him, "Madua loka kol kach harbe al kseifav." Why did you take so much on your shoulders? But Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev was upset. He was agitated with the Alter Rebbe. He said, "Why did you allow this to happen?" Kol kach harbe yisuri klal yisurim, klal Yisrael, yisurim shel maila, yisuri hanefesh, v'yisuri haguf shelachem. You took so much on your shoulders, Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev said to the Alter Rebbe. So many yisurim of klal Yisrael, so many yisurim of above, meaning of the Eibishter Kav. You took upon yourself Yisuri HaNefesh, Yisuri HaGuf, spiritual travail, physical problems. Hari Haya Efshar Lifoil, you could have accomplished this al Yidei Makifim. You could have accomplished this through some transcendent spiritual energy, that it shouldn't impact you in such a way, that you shouldn't have to experience so much pain. Why did you do such a thing? Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev said to the Alter Rebbe. Devarim Eila Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev b'negei liyisuri hamaiser gufa. This is how the Barditchever described the Alter Rebbe's experience in prison. And as we know, hayisurim shahayil Rabbeinu Zokin atzmai begimel hashoyis takev la'achrei hamaiser. The Alter Rebbe said that after he left prison for 3 hours, he ended up in the apartment of somebody who made him more terrible yisurim, greater pain, greater suffering and travail. Shahaya etzlai tsar gadol yoser mikol hamaisa. The Alter Rebbe said that this caused him greater pain than the whole imprisonment. The im kain, and if this is so, once we understand what the Alter Rebbe experienced, move on. It's understood shebigilui hayazainin shel katnus v'nefila, that in a revealed way, this was a diminishment. This was a falling, as it were, legabe madregas hagadlos hakodemesh shel admar zaken. When you compare it to the Alter Rebbe's stature before this, v'chein nira midivrei chayk admar maharshab nishmasa edin, and this is also understood from the words of the Rashab. Even though it's hard to talk like this, afal pikain harikain hi hametzius. But even so, this is what it was. Shagilui ha'or shabal achri Peterburg haya al derech ma'amru razal hazayis she kishe koitchin oisai maitzi shamnai. The Rebbe Rashab said, even though it's hard to make this analogy, but we're forced to say that this is what it was, like what Chazal tell us in the Gemara, that it's only when you press the olive that the olive gives forth its best and most valuable asset, which is the oil. Mimashal zem move on. From this analogy, it's understood Shebeshaz hamaiser, that during the imprisonment, kishe koichin, when the aleph is being pressed, haya idin shel katnus afilu legabe koidem Peterburg. So now the Rebbe is drilling down on this, and he's going to explain to us that in that time of imprisonment, because earlier we said that even though there's expansion and there's contraction, there's expansion, there's contraction, even the contraction is bigger than the previous expansion. But here the Rebbe is saying that during the Maisa, during the imprisonment, during the pressing of the Aleph, there was a katnus, there was a diminishment, even compared to before the imprisonment. How so? The Rebbe explains, Be'ez ketishas hazayit, when you press the Aleph, kasher hazayit munach tachat hakora, when the Aleph is lying under the press, cheserim by beis hamailis. So in that transition time, the Aleph lacks both milas, both the oil that would come from it later and its completion as a self-standing fruit. When you put the olive under the press, in that moment, the oil hasn't come out yet, the oil with which you can illuminate the world. So it doesn't have that advantage. And it also doesn't have its previous advantage, which is that it was a beautiful, complete fruit. Because before, although there was no oil that could be used to irradiate an area, but at least it was still an olive. It was a delicious fruit. And you can make a brach on it. But when you're pressing the olive, you don't have this and you don't have that. My grandmother had expression, verstinken fish and verfeilte eier. Stinky fish and ruined eggs. Not this and not that. You don't have either. And in like fashion, we can understand what the Alter Rebbe was experiencing during the imprisonment. Not only was there not yet the promulgation, the widespread of Hasidus like there would be afterwards, but at that moment, at the time, during the imprisonment, but in prison, he wasn't even able to say the Hasidus for his own Hasidus, for his own Hasidim. Even on a more limited scale, he couldn't say Hasidus. The Inyan Zeh, and this deficit, that during his imprisonment, there wasn't the opportunity, there wasn't the possibility for him to spread Hasidus. This impacted the Alter Rebbe himself. That even a tzaddik, a complete tzaddik, Alter Rebbe says, that doesn't teach Torah because of weakness, physical weakness, sarich lashuv b'tshuva shleima me'umka deliba. He has to return in tshuva from the depth of his heart. V'advarim amurim oidis talmud Torah stam. Umikol shekein kishem medubar oidis talmud Torah derabim, v'alachas kama v'kama oidis pnimius haTorah. And that is true about teaching Torah. How much more so this is true, that is true about learning Torah. How much more so this is true about teaching Torah to throngs, to a rabbim, to a community. And how much more so when it relates to teaching Hasidus. And that's why the Alter Rebbe said about himself, I am diminished. Yud Gimel. B'chol shana v'shana, every year, chayzrim v'nishnim oisam hinyanim. Everything that occurred then reoccurs again today. V'chevon shakol hinyanim matchilim mehaTorah. L'chein karim b'Torah b'Shabbos hasmucha Oy b'Shabbos shachol ba Yutas Kislev katanti mikol hachasadim. Because everything is found in Torah, therefore, every year we read these words in the Parsha, either in the Shabbos that is adjacent to, or sometimes Yutas Kislev falls on the Shabbos where we read the words katanti mikol hasadim. Shezuhi habakasha shel Yaakov Avinu v'shel Nesiei Yisrael. This is the one bakasha. This is the request. This is what Yaakov Avinu and every Nasi of Yisrael entreats from Hakadosh Baruch Hu. U'tekeisa b'kehilas Yaakov shenasi Rashi Teves nitzutze shel Yaakov Avinu, and like it says in the Sefer Kehilas Yaakov that the word Nasi is an acrostic for nitzutze, the spark of Yaakov Avinu. That there's a spark of Yaakov Avinu in every Nasi, in every leader. Va'ad Mahazokein befrat, and especially the Alter Rebbe, shehem mispalalim, that these Nasiim, they daven, they pray, v'gam avor kol echad miYisrael, and for everyone of Klal Yisrael, shemibli habeit al kach shekatanti, that although we're diminished, it's true, we have deficits, tekuyim etzlei havtacha, that we should see the fulfillment of the promise from this week's Parsha right after these words, Heitiv Eitiv Imach, I'm going to make it good for you, V'samti azaracha kechol hayama shelo yisupar meroiv, and I'm going to make your descendants to be as so many, they will proliferate as the grains of the sand that is near a ocean. They cannot be counted. They can never be quantified. That's our sikha for today.
I'm processing.
Yeah.